which a few of you probably also know. ACT NRM, or Natural Resource Management, sits within the ACT Government Environment Division. So if you're a little bit confused as to where we sit, that's where we are. We sit in the ACT Government Environment Division, and our jurisdiction is obviously the whole ACT, but we do like to go over the border into New South Wales when we can. So, of course, I'm here in Canberra on Ngunnawal land, so I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the ACT and recognise any other people and families with connection to the land in the ACT in the region. We're very fortunate to live where we do, and I acknowledge and pay my respect to the continuing culture and the contribution that they make to our life in the city and region. So I'm sure you all are sitting on different lands. If you wanted to pop that in the chat function, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So just while I am acknowledging, I better acknowledge the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund Farm Business Resilience Program. So that's making it possible for us to have this webinar today through funding. It's coming to the end of a 4-year cycle, but we're hoping to co-design a new program with the Future Drought Fund for the following 4 years after June next year. So fingers crossed we do everything right and they're happy with our performance. As I said, I'm missing Mary Bonnet greatly, and hopefully there'll be no IT roadblocks. And I'm sure you're familiar with webinars, but if you, it's probably best to keep your camera and your mic turned off throughout the presentation, just so we don't interrupt Kim with phones going off or the kettle boiling or anything like that. And Jared will be monitoring the chat function. Put any questions in there. If you don't want to do that, just note it down in a little notebook beside your computer and you can ask it at the end. But I guess just a quick little introduction, because I don't want to eat into valuable time. We're very lucky to have Kim today, and she's been, working in this industry for a very long time, over 30 years, and, very experienced in the agricultural business, navigating processes of change and transition in a wide range of contexts, including farming, rural financial planning, whole farm planning, and soil health, which is fantastic. So I will not waste any more of your time. Kim, if you're ready, I'm totally happy to hand over to you.
I am ready.
Yeah, I'll be here in the background and Jared as well, but I'm crossing all my fingers and toes.
Yeah, look, before I share my screen with some presentation slides, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to contribute today. I am based near Inverell in inland northern New South Wales in Anawan country, so not that far away, but a fair way as the crow flies too. So and what I want to do today is sort of just share some tips and tricks I've learned from my experiences working with clients. I'm an independent coach, so work very independently where our clients' success is the focus. And so what I'm sharing is from that and from personal experiences as well along multi-species. I think there's a lot happening in the space and it's developing all the time, but we're really going to focus on some of the, I guess, really giving you some tips for success and, looking at what challenges and things can happen, but also how can we plan for success when we start to increase diversity. So I'm going to now share my screen, which I'm pretty confident I'll be able to do. We've had a bit of tech fun this morning. Hopefully you've got that screen with my slides on it. Is that all?
Yes,
oh, good.
Yeah,
I can display that. So you should have the it in the proper view now. Yeah. Or has it got my presentation view?
It's got, yes, it's got your next slide on the side.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I usually have that work okay with, I'm going to just.
You can still see it though, like it's up to you.
How's that?
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Worked it out. Awesome. I'm not that used to Teams, but I usually figure it out eventually. So and I think what we're going to do today, I've gone to skip through a few slides in that process. Here we go. We're going to look at planning for success, really. And what I want to do is have a think about what are the factors for success? How can we understand when this is a good tool in the toolbox? What situations is it suited for? And some principles behind it. And I've also prepared a little document that I've put in a Google folder that I'll send the link through for everyone to use later and actually use to sort of write your plans down a little bit. So what that's going to look like is looking at some of the benefits we get when we start to use multi-species plantings, again, along with the challenges, and then end up with a bit of a decision-making process. So it might seem like the decision is whether or not to do it, but there's actually a lot more that goes into it if we're going to implement multi-species in any context well. If you think about what multi-species is, for my purposes today, it's really about adding diversity and getting away from monocultures, whether that be like a lot of people think about terms, and a lot of my photos are going to be multi-species cover crops because they're incredibly pretty. But we can also implement multi-species into pasture. And we can, put multi-species plantings in interrow, in horticulture. It has so many different applications, lay cropping, pasture cropping. So it's not just cover crops. These principles apply to any context where you're bringing in more diversity into the system and moving away from monocultural systems. So, and I think that helps us kind of take the principles and adapt them as we need to. Some of the benefits, like I want to go through this fairly quickly, and we're just going to touch on the benefits and the challenges because I really want to get to the planning process. But I think in order to plan, we want to know what we're aiming to achieve. And some of these benefits are some of the goals that we'll have when we start to plant our multi-species crops. The main benefit I think we all start off with is soil health. It's multi-species plantings really hit many of the soil health principles that we work with, and the only way we're going to restore soil carbon, which is the foundation of soil health, is through photosynthesizing plants. So it's a really, really important role to getting us there in terms of soil health. And that's because of the linkage between actively growing photosynthesizing plants with diverse root systems as far as they go into soil organic matter. Because organic matter is in the context of soil health, it's the foundation of all aspects of soil health. It's about cycling minerals. It's about providing a home for the soil biology and the physical health that gives us soil health in the first place. It's about creating soil structure. So it is the foundation of all. And the way we're going to get that back through a multi-species crop is through the liquid carbon pathway. You think about photosynthesizing plants and how we restore soil carbon. There's a couple of ways carbon cycles through this system. There's the decomposition pathway, and there's also the liquid carbon pathway where those photosynthesizing plants are then feeding sugar and exudates down through the roots to the soil microbes. And there's so much, I think we're only just beginning to understand about that system, but it's actually almost 6 times more efficient at getting carbon back in our soil than decomposing the plant residue on the surface is. So it's a really big key to why multi-species plantings in any context can be really helpful for soil health benefits. The other thing is that if we're thinking about root exudates and restoring soil carbon, is thinking about when we add diversity in the system, all those different types of plant root architecture that can support that and hold and stabilize the soil, but even accessing more of the soil because we've got a diversity of plant root systems all working together. I love this next diagram because it really shows you the benefit of the diverse root systems versus that monocultural approach, and how much more soil and exudates we're getting in there, how much more life is there. And plant roots are part of that whole system that's creating the health, holding the soil together, but they're also able to access more soil when we use different kinds of root architecture in these mixes. Part of multi-species plantings too is choosing plants that actually work really well together and compound the benefits, and part of that decision process is deciding what plants are going to work best together in your context. So, that's also part of that soil health thing, and choosing things for synergy and creating great outcomes as well. There's also the ground cover aspect, of that soil health component too. And as I said, creating that home for the soil biology is so important. And these multi-species plantings are really going to help speed things along. The other thing that multi-species will do is help restore water cycles. Now, this is partly because we're restoring soil carbon through more photosynthesis. And once we bring diverse plants in, we're actually going to be able to photosynthesize differently and longer because they'll have different types of growth cycles and life cycles. So we're more likely to have some green photosynthesizing plants in pastures when there's more species there, but also, just choosing to implement that. Once we get more soil carbon, we're going to have better structure. Water's going to infiltrate into our soils better. We're also going to think about, once we can restore the health of the soil and restore that soil carbon, that carbon's holding 1% of carbon is holding 144,000 litres of water per hectare. So it's helping to, get the most of the water that falls into the soil and hang on to it to then grow more plants. So it is a really key in that system, I guess. And obviously having ground cover and getting water infiltration happening as well. We had a bit of rainfall here on Wednesday, and I was driving home from some work at the coast, and there's a bare paddock right next to a pastured paddock, and the water was just lying everywhere on the bare soil. And in the pasture, you couldn't see any sign of the water. We wanted the plants, and the ground cover is so important in getting the water into the ground before the sun comes out today and it all evaporates away. So that's another big part of why these crops and practices are really helpful. The other one's ecosystem services. We all get the bug for planting diversity when we stand in a multi-species stand of any description, but cover crops are probably a pretty big example, but even a multi-species pasture, there's often a lot more life. You see a lot more insects of all descriptions. And it's just often those crops, when I'm in the paddock, you just feel the life force, So the ecosystem services are the pollinators and the beneficial insects, but it's also, like I said, the water cycle's part of that. Harnessing photosynthesis is part of that. And creating shelter and ground cover as well, because it's not just the beneficial insects and habitat above the ground. These plants are also restoring the habitat for all of the billions of microbes underneath the ground that we're just starting to understand more and more about, So they're buffering soil temperatures, they're keeping the system cooler and covered and protected. So that's another really important aspect of them. And for me, when we don't have living plants growing in the soil, we're starving the ecosystem beneath the soil. So that's a quote out of a really great book. If you're keen to learn more about soil health, it was a book I enjoyed a lot. And this quote just really stayed with me when I read it, because we're trying to also, through photosynthesis, feed the biology that are then going to cycle the minerals and carry out the ecosystem services that we rely on. The agronomy side of these crops is another benefit, okay? As I said, as we restore soil health, we get more nutrients cycling through the system. We also can suppress weeds when we use diversity in a targeted way, in a managed way. It can be used to suppress weeds and reduce some of the chemical bills. And as people implement these practices, these benefits don't happen straight away, but they compound over time so that we can start to suppress diseases, break pest life cycles and disease cycles, and reduce our reliance on inputs, using more targeted approaches to inputs rather than being stuck in a treadmill of needing them for production. We start to see over time, when we manage the system regeneratively, we can shift some of those high input practices. Like I said, it happens over time with management. But there's some pretty awesome production gains when we implement diversity. And this is some data that came from research conducted on fattening lambs, where the growth rate of lambs was increased a lot through the multi-species plantings. I've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence. It's great to see some research coming out, but I've also seen anecdotal evidence from farmers working in the field. Dairy farmers often see the benefit really quickly because they get daily feedback on milk statistics and things like that, and start to notice that when their animals are getting access to more diversity, things get really improved quite quickly. A lot of us don't get that immediate feedback on the system, but improved animal health because they're getting diversity in their diet, improved growth rates, improved milk stats. Sometimes also parasite issues, depending on what the diversity of plants are. I know chicory is a great plant to keep in as pasture with sheep, as far as helping them prevent worms. There's a lot of copper. It's a copper accumulator, I think. the top of my head, but it is a great plant for helping with that sort of animal health issue, and just filling feed gaps too. Like we can implement this system to bring in species to help intentionally fill feed gaps at times when we have the weather that goes with it. So there is a lot more production research happening on diversity in species, and it's very encouraging. But one that's really important is profitability. Over time, when we manage the system in a way to bring in some of these benefits, those, profit can improve because we're restoring soil health. And, when we look at profit, we can't really truly gain in profit if we're declining soil health to make money. True profit comes from improving the resource base and maintaining it. So, if we can manage the costs of this practice, profitability can be an option. But we'll talk about the challenges in a minute, and managing the costs is really, really important. But, like I said, also improving the soil organic matter over time. And like I said, this doesn't happen with the first seed that hits the ground, but if you implement this practice over time and manage it for regenerative outcomes, and that soil carbon improves, you're going to have a more resilient system, which helps build in profit. And studies in the States have shown that farm profitability has been more directly affected by organic matter than yield. So, because of that resilience piece, because it holds all that moisture, it's a really important aspect of this. And I guess, we're creating outcomes where profit is the fruit on the tree. It's not profit if we run that system down and reduce the productivity of that tree or system. I really like that quote, because profit doesn't happen when we're running it down. And multi-species, when we manage them in a way to harness the benefits and move the system in an increasing health direction, then we can unlock that as well. So that's a really important key, I think. But also, because we're improving our resilience and profitability, reducing our inputs, hopefully restoring the water cycle over time, all of this compounds into increasing our resilience when we have climate variability. And we're on the front line of that, aren't we? So there's some pretty encouraging reasons to give diversity in whatever context fits you a go. But also in doing that, remember that there's a few challenges that we can plan around. Some of these challenges that I'll go through today, probably it's not an exhaustive list because we know every context is different, but some of the ones that I see most common in the farmers I've worked with who are implementing multi-species plantings, one of them's seed and the cost of seed, particularly when you start putting lots of different plants in the mix, it can be quite expensive. And so thinking about the seed costs, also thinking about the sourcing seed as best you can that's suitable for your system. One of the things that is getting interesting is when we start to create a different kind of farming system that we're not heavily reliant on inputs for, some of the seeds we're able to access are being bred and developed for high input systems. So it's an interesting one of, trying to find the appropriate sources of seed that'll do well in our situations. And over time, it's becoming easier to get multi-species seeds from people growing in regenerative systems, which is going to make that issue easier to deal with. And also, if you can find untreated seeds, that's always great. And it's getting easier to find untreated seeds in some contexts, but sometimes it's a bit of you get what you get, don't you? But obviously looking for seed that will work in your system and seed that's not treated is ideal, because we're trying to harness soil biological health, and we're trying, depending on the context and the goals in which you're growing this crop in, those things might come into it. Again, it's hard to generalize because there's so many ways we can bring this practice in, but thinking about seed and how you're going to source it and how many species you're going to use. Also choosing seed. I think where this planning process I'm going to talk about in a minute comes in is we often go straight to the seed catalogue and start dreaming about all these plants and what we're going to grow. But, thinking about the species is definitely part of it, and designing a mix that's going to harness symbiosis and work really well together, plants that will complement each other, Also choosing plants from different plant types. So having cereals, having legumes, sometimes there's the chenopod's, which are your things like what is it, beet, and there's a few chenopod's like I'm just got the names escaping me, amaranths and things like that can go in. Forbs broadleaf crops as well, grasses, like choosing from different types of plants for different root systems and different functions can be really, really important. And there are so many resources on seeds and the role that the different plants have in terms of soil health and all sorts of attributes they have, thinking about the seasons those plants grow in as well, and the soils that they like. You can go down a rabbit hole of reading about all these plants. It can take a while. So what I've put in the shared Google folder that I'm going to send Jenny at the end of today is a few resources with this information in them to get you started, including this chart, which is quite a great resource out of America on a few different plants and the seasons and their attributes. So you can start to think about what you might plant where. I find there's a lot more of these resources on cover crops than there are other multi-species plantings, but you kind of take the principles and apply them if you're doing pasture improvement in the same way, So that's a really, really important one. Lots and lots of resources to guide you. The other thing I think that we need to think about, and this is part of your planning process for success, is to think about the successional state that your soil system is in. When I talk about succession, when we have soils form and ecosystems form and we're farming in these systems and we're altering them, as the plant successional process occurs, we're going to have more luck planting the plants that are suited to where our system is up to, if that makes sense. So when a soil starts to form on bare rock, the first organisms to grow are the lichens, and then those annual weedier plants that come to bind the soil together are those pioneering type plants that come in to create the conditions to then the system will eventually move on to more perennial grasslands. And over time, when we leave land alone, it's always moving towards forest, isn't it? And then in agriculture, we alter things and can either send it backwards or try and keep it in a steady state to suit our production. But when we ignore the successional process, sometimes we're planting perennial plants in a system that's really wanting only to grow annuals because we've set it back and its health's declined over time, unintentionally, but that's what we've done. And so sometimes we need to think about what plants would do best here. And in the resource folder, there's a great article that's come out of South Africa where they develop a system with multi-species cover crops to restore soil, starting with the successional process and gradually moving it along. And I find that approach is really helpful when we're planning to think about where we're at. Because, we also have succession can happen. They call it secondary succession, but we often get disturbances in our agricultural systems from things like fire, flood, drought that can also create bare ground and interfere with the successional dynamics that exist in nature. There we start back again. So thinking about that, it's a really handy process and one that will help you in your planning if you start to think about what plants are trying to grow here and what are they telling me about what diversity is going to do best and get me bang for my buck. Because if I try and plant things that are too far advanced, they might not thrive in this system and they might not give me the results I need to keep moving the system forward as quickly. This is another diagram on the same theme. It's one I had from working with Nicole Masters at Integrity Soils, and it's another one showing how those soil microbial communities also follow along with this successional dynamic. And that is also part of why, if we're choosing to bring in diversity, and our system's quite bacterially dominated and it's wanting to grow lots of weeds and lots of annuals, maybe choosing crops or diverse pastures that fit more there and starting maybe with some annuals first can help shift that system along more gradually and get you the results quicker. And over time, as health restores and the system is moving more towards more complexity, you can start to change the species selection for that. So quick overview of a very complex topic, but I hope I've inspired you to start to think a little bit about where am I and what plants would work best if I'm going to bring in more diversity. The other challenge is getting things established, like you know, if we throw in a heap of seeds and some of them come up really quickly and some of them are more slow, we might have some, you know, some plants establishing better than others because by the others, some come up, the others are overcrowding or shading them out. So thinking about the types of plants you're putting together and how you're going to plant, you know, what are you planting into? How are you going to get the best result from the money you're spending on seed, timing, soil temperatures, managing ground cover, etc., and equipment? There's a lot of decisions that go into this, and there's so many contexts, but that's part of the challenge, is finding the best way for you. And sometimes it's a bit of a process. But I also thought I'd show you, and I think I've included this in the Google folder. You can also find it online. Heytesbury District Landcare Network have a cultivation calculator they developed through some projects around multi-species crops down in their area in Victoria to help you look at different ways to prepare land for multi-species crops and pastures. So that would be something, if you're thinking about you might need to cultivate or you might need to prepare ground, have a look at that. It's a really great resource, developed in the context of Victoria, but I think it still has value to inform your decisions around establishing these plants as well. Really, really cool. But then there's also machinery challenges. Lots of people have on their wish list one of these roller crimpers. This is one of the clients that we were at. They just taken delivery of it and we're just playing around with it when we were there. But, you know, thinking about what our machinery is going to do, like can our sowing equipment handle the conditions that we're going to be planting into? Can we deal with the different seed sizes? Can we manage crop termination? Like if we're going to do that, or, you know, are we going to crash graze it? Are we using stock in the system? All these things come into it. Do I need a roller crimper or not? You know, are there other ways we can deal with it? Or are we going to herbicide? Like there's all sorts of different things that come into that machinery aspect, and how you then, like obviously getting it established and getting the end result you want, depending on your context. I think grazing is a very simple system to use this in, but those people who don't have livestock, there's a lot of other challenges that go with machinery. So that's part of your planning for success, is starting to think about that as well. And this is just some photos I thought I'd show you of what a roller crimped paddock looked like. In one place we were visiting at one stage, it's not that same machine that I had in the photo before, and it's a pretty big scale, but you can see some people are using machinery to roll and crimp the residue and plant into that. In some contexts that works, but again, it's a whole other piece of equipment and every context is different. But I think the biggest tool in your toolbox is actually your management. You don't have to have all the gear and all the bells and whistles, because you can have all that, but if you're not managing these diverse plantings for the soil health outcomes you want or the goals you want, then you might be falling short. You know, our decisions are what create the outcomes in these contexts. It's not like it's a quick fix, I throw all the seed out, it'll all work, because how we graze it, how we manage it, how we interact with it's the biggest decision of all. Also, you know, in management systems, thinking about previous crop rotations and also what's coming after this. If it's a cover crop, I've seen they can create delays sometimes in planning and getting things happening when people are just starting to play with it, because the residues, they've got to manage all this residue, or they've somehow got to work out how they deal with the conditions to get it ready for the next crop. In grazing systems, how we graze it is going to determine whether we get any soil health benefit or not. Because if we plant a beautiful, diverse pasture or fodder crop and we overgraze it and we can send our soil health backwards just the same. So it's really, really important to pay attention to our management, and thinking about rotations if we're looking at pests and disease cycles, and, you know, getting a really thorough understanding of where it fits and how we need to manage it for the outcome that is our goal. You know, as I said, grazing's huge. There's no point spending all of this resources on a beautiful, diverse fodder crop or pasture and running it to the ground without grazing management. As you can see, using it and grazing it well is really, really vital. And that can also extend the benefits from it in your system as well. The other aspect of management and part of your planning needs to be thinking about what's coming after this. If you're in a system where you want to plant something else behind it, how long is it going to take for these crop residues to decompose and break down and cycle back through the system? Because different plants have different carbon to nitrogen ratios, and some will cycle and decompose really quickly, like some of the really leafy green legumes, like vetch decomposes really quickly. If your goal is to have some long-term ground cover, even in the form of the plant residue, vetch is probably not a great choice on its own, because it's going to decompose really quickly, where those more higher carbon materials like wheat straw and rice straw are going to hang around for a bit longer and provide a bit more protection and residue on the surface. So that's also part of your planning process, is to start to think about that. How do we manage those residues in our system? And then, that also comes into persistence and allelopathy. There are some crops that can have an allelopathic effect on what you plant next. I think millet can do that a little bit, but I don't know that it does it in every context. So I think it can depend on the context we're working in, how long some of these allelopathic effects can happen. I have read that buckwheat can be a bit allelopathic, but I have had a client who planted some millet had a 3-species cover, and then things were struggling after that. So, and then I did a bit of research on millet to find it might be a bit allelopathic, but again, I think it's sometimes context specific too. But allelopathy is when those plants are also releasing chemicals through their root systems that are preventing other plants from germinating. So understanding that can sometimes be an issue. Playing with it in your context is really helpful. And some of these plants, if they set seed, they might come around again. And are you going to be able to cope with that? Are they going to become a plant that kind of naturalizes and stays there? And that in a grazing system, that's fine. But if people are cropping, that can sometimes create a few challenges. So thinking about that as well, and how we pick the right plants, like a bit of homework on plant species selection, it goes a long way. Some people claim, like, they worry about soil moisture. So say you decide to plant a cover crop, and if you're in a cropping system, which you might not be as much down your way, but there may be still some people growing a few crops in your area, there's a concern around soil moisture. And I think when you're starting in a system and you're starting to regenerate it and starting to bring in diversity, this probably is going to be an effect on soil moisture in the short term. But over time, restoring the soil carbon is actually going to store more water in your soil and improve the soil structure to get more water in your soil. So a lot of these practices, it's about committing for the long term to see that impact over time, that over time, some of these practices, when managed in a way to restore soil health, will create better outcomes. But you have to commit for a long time to see that, at least 3 years. Don't expect it all to shift immediately, although it may shift quicker than that. It's always an it depends answer, I guess, from what I'm watching in the field. So thinking about that as well. And also, if you're looking at soil moisture considerations, if you've got a cover crop in, the time you terminate that against when you're planning can also come into account, like starting to really look and see when are those timings going to be the most effective in your system, and starting to question into that a little bit so that you can make the best use of the situation and the year that you're in, because every year is different. But you have to manage a few risks when you're doing this. And for me, I would encourage people, one of the biggest risks is the cost of seed. So for people, if they jump on sowing 12 species in a mix, there's a lot of expense in seed. If you're in a really dry year, maybe you're better off planting 2 or 3 species than investing in 12. Gauge the weather. Look at your rolling annual rainfall. What's that doing? And is there a risk in planting too many species that you might not see the result? So choosing the plants that are suitable to your soil type, your climate, your season, the successional state your soil is in, but also thinking about where am I at in terms of current rainfall. Rolling annual rainfall of less than 300 in a high evaporation climate like Australia, it's getting pretty risky to put lots and lots of different types in, but you can still do some diversity. I think it's just kind of adjusting that to the season. And the other one is adjusting that species number. If cash flow is a challenge, we'll start with 3 species. You don't have to go the whole hog to get started and start to see the benefits. Just use your budget and the weather as your guide, and that will be a really important practice, because I have seen instances where money has been spent and the weather has gone against things and the outcomes haven't happened. And so, when we're living in that uncertainty, those are 2 ways to guide your system. But having a plan is a really good idea. Like, you can see there's some beautiful benefits we want to capture, but there's a few challenges in the mix. As in agriculture, it's never really that simple, is it? Plus, you want to have a bit of a plan and manage your own expectations. Actually sit and take a long-term view, commit to at least 3 years in a paddock, and start with one paddock. Start somewhere where you can watch and learn, and start to think about all of those things. Just start where you're at, really. And the reason I like the concept of planning and encourage my farmers to plan is because when we don't, our plan can be in our head, can be a bit of a jumble, like this cartoon. I use this cartoon a lot, actually, because I'm often teaching whole farm planning or planning processes and business planning, as well as the soil work I do. And I think if we have our plan in our head, it gets a bit jumbled. And the whole point of writing it down is to get us to pull out those threads and get a nice, neat focus, get us focused on what works for us and where we need to go. And so this little decision-making process will hopefully help guide you. And I've put it in a document to help you as well that you can download from the Google folder. But think about first clarifying your goals. Like, what are you trying to achieve? What is the vision for planting multi-species? What are you trying to, what issues are you trying to address with your soil health? What are you hoping it's going to create for you? What have you got excited about planting diversity for, and clarify where you want to go? Like, it's really, really important, because otherwise we can just be chasing our tail when we're not clear where we're going, So thinking about your goal, think about your budget. Like I said, your budget's important. We want to keep you there and keep you stewarding the land in the way you are. So always think about the budget. And in the document, there's lots of places to note the costs down. Like, there are costs involved in seed and different things you're doing. So always consider your budget and write all your costs down. But think about assessing the risks as well. What's the climatic risk? As I said, what's my annual rolling rainfall? Where am I up to with that? What sort of season am I aiming for? In my context with the climate I live in is, what time of year would this work best for us to get the best establishment, best results, best growth? What soil constraints am I confronting on my property to help you choose the right types of plants, and the equipment availability? Like, all of those things go into risk taking, and they're going to affect the budget and the outcomes you get too. So think about those risks, and then the timing. That's partly the seasonal risks involved, but also appropriate risk. What am I trying to fit it in around? How does it fit in what I'm already doing? And when am I going to get what makes most sense for me to play with this technique? How are you going to use, if it's a cover crop or a multi-species pasture, it's probably going to be grazed. But if it's not being grazed, how are you going to use it? Like, that's a really important thing to think about before you spend money on seed, because often we get the seed, put it in, and then we go, now what? Well, we're trying to avoid that and think about it ahead of time, because that way we'll get the best outcome. Then start going to the seed catalogue. Once you know what you're trying to achieve, what money you've got to put into and invest in this process, what risk you're managing, the best time of year for you, how you're going to use it, then you're going to make a much better choice when it comes to species selection. So don't go straight to the seed catalogue, but go to it then. But then don't stop there. Once you've chosen them, planted, established, and started playing with this technique, I think it's really important to take some monitoring results, particularly of your soil health. It's often a common goal behind it. But whatever your goals are, monitor against those to see your progress. And progress can happen and be quite obvious quickly sometimes, but sometimes it can be a bit delayed. You don't want to stop doing something good and fall short of the outcomes when you're almost there. So when you measure and monitor some things like water infiltration, soil health measurements, those types of things, you'll really start to see whether you're going forwards or backwards, because you really want to know, is this achieving my goals? Not just guessing. You're investing money, time, energy, money, and resources into a process. See how you're going for sure. And the thing about monitoring is you're getting clear. You're going to have more motivation to take the right actions, but you'll also see more opportunities and you'll actually see the progress. You won't miss stuff that when you're in that busyness, or you're actually, sometimes we just don't stop and look. So you want to see the progress you're making. For me, it's like that early warning. But are you going forwards or are you going backwards? Is there something about this practice that's missing the mark in my context? And what can I learn from it? Because it's not failing if you're learning from what you're doing. It's feedback, and it's telling you something if it's going backwards that you're not seeing yet, but it's there. So it's really to question in and find what you're learning through the process. And monitoring is really important. So for me, that's the kind of process I would encourage you to plan for. And what I've done, I'm just going to show you a couple of more slides, is put it into a document you can download and write down all these factors as you sit with your context. So your multi-species program in your context, you know, choosing the place to carry it out and looking at what the soil constraints are. What's your goal? What's your season that you're going for? You know, it's just to note it all down, because part of this is getting you the process and thinking about the plan and how it works together. But it's also, if you think about the budgeting costs, writing down your species and your sowing rates, what are you going to gain from it? All of the aspects are involved. It helps you think it through and monitor it and write down what you're learning, because then the next year when you go to do something again, or you go to maybe add a bit more diversity in, you've actually kept this information in a place you can access it again, and you're learning and recording and growing through the process. Because I think, you know, there's a lot of practices that we can try, and if we don't have a bit of a system around it, we can kind of not see what's happening when, and we don't keep the records that make it easier for us to continue or help us to learn and grow through it. Like, so if it works, well, great. But if it didn't, we've still got something we can learn that's valuable. So it's about harnessing that, I think, and working through that process of having a bit of a formal plan. So that document, like I said, there's a Google folder with some of my favorite resources on different species of plants and what they do. And also I'll pop this in there so that you can sort of have a think about how it fits for you in your context, and then what you need to think about, and keep some data and records so that you can share that with other people when you start to see these really cool results, that you're also going to be able to share that and inspire others with some pretty cool data, I reckon. So that's the benefit of planning too, is that you've got more information to share with others and share the learnings together when you're doing it as a group or alone. It's really, really valuable. So I've managed to keep that with some time for questions, and I hope I didn't talk too quick. I have a habit of that, especially when you're talking to a webinar screen. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and so I can see all of your faces and have a bit of a time for a chat, I guess, about everything.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. If you want to take a break and a quick drink of water, you've done an amazing job, and you know, like that information that you've presented us is in a really user-friendly way, and I, you know, really particular like the way that you sort of stress, you know, think about your budget, think about the weather, trial it on a small paddock, you know, like don't rush out there with 12 species and, you know, 40 hectares and you're going to save the world. It's, you know, sometimes, and we sort of say it in our great ACT grazing group, it's like, just pick a small section of a paddock and scratch it up and throw a bit of seed around that you can get your hands on, and just have a bit of a play and a bit of a feel. So, you know, really appreciate you stressing that. But enough from me. Any questions from the rest of the audience? Either unmute, camera, whatever, or however you feel comfortable. Anyone?
Yeah. Oh, you go first, Kimberly, sorry.
That's right, Aaron, you go.
Oh, I was really curious. I think firstly, Kim, that was a brilliant presentation. I really enjoyed that. And I was really curious around how fostering diversity and through these practices of multi-species, either they're being pastures or cropping, can help farm resilience as a whole.
Yeah, fostering diversity fits on so many levels, doesn't it? It can increase, it can make it, sometimes diversity can increase the management challenges a little bit, but at the other side, there's the resilience angle. So in terms of pastures, you're going to have more nutrition, you're going to have, because animals don't want to eat one thing. Have you ever seen a heap of stock in an oats paddock and they're all on the edges trying to reach through the fence? They like the oats, but they need a bit of variety in their diet. My husband Angus always says it'd be like us just eating lettuce all the time. Like we need diversity, and I watch the animals seek it out when we move paddocks. They'll browse and take bits of different things. They love diversity, like they're seeking it out. So partly it's resilience from an animal health perspective, but also when you've got diverse plants in any system, you're capturing more sunlight and more photosynthesis because they'll all be moving through their own life cycles they might have slightly different patterns of growth. So there's more likely to be a plant photosynthesizing at any one time. And if we're photosynthesizing, we're feeding soil microbes, we're capturing sunlight and turning it into carbon. So when we're not capturing sunlight through photosynthesis, our system it's going backwards, it's stagnant. So it's really that system of restoring and cycling minerals and keeping the soil life alive as well, which is part of our resilience. And we probably know this much of so much about soil biology, but it's part of feeding and nurturing the soil food web as well as our animals and ourselves. And yeah, like you think about diversity on any level, if you get different climatic events, different plants are going to respond differently according to their growth seasons and their own attributes, aren't they? So just gives you so much of a buffer, I think. Yeah.
Kim, did you still want to ask a question?
Yeah, look, when you were listing the benefits of the cover crops, Kim, you obviously mentioned feed gaps in there, but I noted that you listed it last. Was that of intentional or it just part of how you presentation?
It's probably part of my thought process when I was putting it down. Like, it also helps with that. Like, so it's definitely important. Like, in some areas where we don't get a lot of winter pasture growth, adding some diversity through a pasture crop can fill that winter gap kind of, in our winter oats and different plants like that. So, it's definitely an important strategy in it, is filling feed gaps and optimizing nutrition of animals. But instead of just planting one species, adding that diversity at the same time it's really a good opportunity to do that. Yeah.
There was I was overthinking there, you adding it last. So
no, I think I was just acknowledging it's a really important tool. Yeah,
really good question, Kim, too, because I think that's very relevant around here in the ACT. We've got our cold winters and there is that winter feed gap that we tend to miss out on. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it's definitely the case where I am too. And so it's a great opportunity to expand, get some other plants growing. Yeah.
Who else wants to ask a question? I mean, I would love to see some multi-species paddocks around here in Canberra and the beauty of them, and just from a health and wellbeing perspective, I think.
I know some people who are doing this on a garden scale too, even if you just put it around your, I often bit the same in our gardens around our house, throwing buckwheat and all sorts of things in and just letting them grow because it is, these practices work on every single scale, and broad beans are another amazing, faba beans are an amazing soil builder, winter grower as well, although they don't like the frost that we get. We're on a really frosty site and they are not looking as good at my friends in town who doesn't get our frost, but they are such a great soil builder. And I know once the frost stops, they'll recover and they'll come into their own. But certain plants like that on any scale can be beautiful soil builders.
Jared, did you have any questions? I just know there's a little delay and I keep talking over you.
Yeah, that's all right. No, I got a couple. So you mentioned that that if you're going into a dry period or you think it's going to be dry, that more species is like you would be preferring to go with less species. Is that because of Is that just because of the cost of seed, or is that because of something associated with something else?
No, for me, it's more managing the costs, yeah, and thinking about that
So it's cost of
financial.
seed. Yeah.
And again,
Uh-huh.
if you're going in on a small area, you might not need to adjust the species down, but if you're stretching and it's going to be a huge financial investment, think about the number of species. Yeah, just because you could spend a lot of money on seed, and because there could be instances where the diversity means something grows better than the others, the more diversity you've got in there. But if you're managing a budget and you're trying to take too big a financial loss if it doesn't pay off, because I've seen in the dry times that crops get planted and they might not fulfill their potential, and so it can be quite a significant investment in seed. So think about managing that budget, and that's the main thing.
So
yeah,
thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
So I've just got a couple of questions for the group. First of all, is there anybody in the group who have successfully undertaken pasture renovation but used multiple species to develop it? And another one I wanted to put out there as well is, has anybody worked with trying to terminate lovegrass by using multi-species as another one? And yeah, that's a couple of questions. I can't remember the other one I was going to say. I'm just interested to know. Oh, that's right. That's to me. I'm interested in the ACT, whether it's more perennial pastures or it's this. I know that there's a few people who combat lovegrass by spraying out and planting with oats, etc. I'm just interested in what's the mix and the interest that has brought you here. What's the context and the mix of why you're interested?
Jared, I can jump in. So we are out on the Cotter Road, and all of those reasons are why we're here, but we haven't, we're very much in the research stage at the moment, and just thinking about, what might work on our place. Yeah, we definitely haven't implemented any of that yet, but yeah, definitely that's why we're here, is to understand, if we think it will work and what's the best mix for our property.
Right. Does anybody else want to put something forward?
Hello, Jared. It's Sue Sayer here. One of the things that I was looking at was really getting something in the ground for winter as opposed to having to plant a crop every year. So looking at adding some perennial grasses to get a bit more diversity through the winter. Yep.
Kim, have you got any suggestions on winter active perennial pasture plants that could be in the mix? I mean, I know where I am in East Gippsland, over the cold part of winter, there's just nothing that's any good for feed.
Yeah, and I find the same thing. We've got some beautiful perennials up here, and in winter everything slows right down. So, but our best chances of winter growth tend to be clovers and chicories and things like that. So not necessarily perennial pastures, but I think, and I'm not located where you guys are, so I think it's to just start trying a few things as well, and just seeing what goes well, like in your own context, because there's no one answer, is there? Yeah, and again, I think what I'm noticing up here, even with perennials that go dormant in winter, people are starting to maybe throw some annuals in the mix, but that's high input. It requires you to come back every year. So it's not, perennials seem to be the best way to go long term for so many reasons, but sometimes the annuals are what can help give it a kickstart along too, and bring a bit of life in the dormant period to activate soil biology, and other species might then come through, because there's a huge seed bank in the soil that is waiting for the conditions to germinate. And it's amazing when you start to do things that shift your system in a different direction, particularly with grazing management, the different species that can then come through and that germinate that you weren't seeing before is quite incredible. And things like here, the kangaroo grass and things like that are increasing over time, and some of the annoying species that we don't like so much are decreasing as we graze differently, and takes time, but yeah, that sometimes brings in exactly what nature will support in your system as well. So sometimes it's just trying a few different species and observing and learning from your local area, yeah, and your soil types. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So yeah, has anybody else had any experience with putting multi-species pastures in as either just purely just to try to increase yield, or as a way of being able to combat lovegrass? No. So one last thing I just wanted to mention to the group as well is that we are currently working on offering a system of whole farm planning through ACT NRM, and also we have a program which will be going alongside that, where we're going to be doing each year we're going to have a demonstration trial plot for multi-species. So I guess everybody who's shown interest in this space here, if you're interested in potentially being one of the pilot spots, then let us know. Just stay in contact with us, and because yeah, we're wanting to be able to trial in a few different soil types, and then we're going to be doing the following up of all of the soil health monitoring. So yeah, I guess that's just something that I wanted to just put out there for the group as well.
Awesome, thanks, Jared. So that offer would be for ACT rural landowners. Unfortunately, we can't go over the border to New South Wales. But of course, you know, we're always willing to have field days and share our findings with our wonderful neighbours across the border as well. Well, if there's no more questions, we are 1 minute over time. Oh yeah, okay. So Rick, thank you. Yeah, we can put something in the follow-up email if you like, but as like I mentioned, it is for ACT rural landowners only. I'm sure LLS have something similar, and we can follow that up for you as well. But
no, it's more about. Sorry.
Yep.
It's more about I'm not a rural landowner, but I have a large backyard that I want to reestablish to be healthy. So I guess I would be interested in how these kind of programs could be adapted to more urban residents as well.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so one of the ways that it could be quite a useful thing is to have a look at some of the native seed supplies, and to consider putting in let's say a guild of native seeds and of grasses as well as forbs to re-establish. And you know, you may be able to solarize an area with and to be able to eliminate the species which are there at the moment, and then oversow with some native seeds with some minimal tillage. That's just some ideas, I guess. And yeah, I know that there's a few people around who are offering kangaroo grass hay, which is you could be using as a, you know, like a cover mulch whilst you're getting your stuff established, just if it was put on very thin. Anyway, that's just some ideas.
Yeah, the principles apply on every scale, don't they? Like you just got to, you only limits your imagination, really.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right, I really want to thank you, Kim, for your time and your presentation and explanation of everything. And yeah, it will follow through with an email to you all and those who are registered with some more documentation and resources as well. But yeah, massive thanks to Kim. Of course, Jared, who's the Sustainable Agriculture Manager, for helping with some IT and managing and your questions. And just for those who are still on the line, Aaron Fahey there, he is also our new staff member, and he's going to be delivering our National Soils Action Program. So you'll be seeing him a little bit more around in the ACT. So Thank you very much, everyone who's come on board today. Really appreciate your time. Jared, if you want to stop the recording, that would be good. We all hope to see you on the 20th of September again with Kim. So that's for our Weeds as Indicator webinar. So please register for that, and we'll hopefully see you again.